Was Jesus non-binary? This is a actually serious question that's going on online, and it's actually gaining traction. I'm Levi Bimba, and this is Doulos. Before today's episode, if you're needing a proven plan for financial success to get out of debt, get on a budget, and get on a path to building long-term durable wealth for you and your family, contact me, Levi Bimba, at ramseycoach.com/Doulos Financial Coaching for a free 30-minute consultation to see if we can get you on that track and heading towards a strong financial future. So schedule your free consultation today. So we are living in a time when it is just full-on narcissism on display for the world to see. Everybody is so obsessed with their own thoughts, their own ideas, their own reasonings, and they are wanting everybody to capitulate to what they believe about themselves, about the world. And if you even question or say otherwise, they don't want to hear it at all. And I became aware of this narcissistic concept when our former pastor, Doug, he went on to heaven to be with the Lord last year. But he was very insightful in his teaching, and he talked about how we're living in a narcissistic age. People are so obsessed with themselves. It didn't really click with me until I started learning about what narcissism is and how prevalent really it has become within our culture. And so I want to talk a little bit about what narcissism actually is according to the Merriam-Webster definition. And it says, narcissism is egocentrism, which is excessive interest in oneself and concern for one's own welfare or advantage at the expense of or in disregard of others. So this is something that is all about the self. If somebody is making me feel uncomfortable, somebody is making me feel like I'm not being heard, or my self-worth is not elevated in your eyes the way I think it should, then you are doing something wrong and something needs to change about you. Nothing about me needs to be changed, but something about you has to be changed. And so this actually echoes what the book of Judges talks about, I think 2 or 3 verses, as Israel moved away from what was established law in the eyes of God and what God really had established for them to live by. They moved away from that, and the book of Judges said everybody did that which was right in their own eyes. And we're seeing that on display today. Everywhere you look, especially if you go online, people are saying and doing things that they think are right within their own eyes, and nobody can criticize them at all, or else they're just coming off as judgmental and wicked and evil. But this kind of thinking, this kind of egocentrism, this kind of narcissism has led people to the path of even blaspheming Jesus and completely perverting his own identity of who he said he was to fit their own expression of especially a sexual identity. And Jesus was the God-man. He was born of a Virgin Mary. Yes, he was born supernaturally of a virgin. And he was made he came into the world, really, he wasn't made, but he came into the world, the second person of the Trinity, to die on the cross for sin so that we could be saved from the wrath of God. But people want to pervert that whole identity of who Jesus was to fit their own narrative of who they are and think that if we can get Jesus to conform to who I am, then it must be right. But of course, they're just blinded in their thinking and hardened in their heart. And so there's a video online of this guy who was so sure of himself saying that Jesus was non-binary. And we're going to listen to what he has to say. But before we get into that real quick, I want to just tell you what non-binary is if you're not familiar with the term. And this is according to the National Center for Transgender Equality. And they say that most people, including most transgender people, are either male or female. But some people don't neatly fit into the categories of man or woman or male or female. For example, some people have a gender that blends elements of being a man or a woman, or a gender that is different from either male or female. Some people don't identify with any gender, which again this is just nonsense on display. It's people that are hardened in their heart and they have a darkened mind. So they say some people's gender changes over time. People whose gender is not male or female use many different terms to describe themselves, with non-binary being one of the most common. Other terms include genderqueer, agender, bigender, and more. None of these terms mean exactly the same thing, which really should be obvious because there's really no set standards for any of this stuff. But all speak to an experience of gender that is not simply male or female. So really, they're known for what they're against, or against the male-female binary that God himself set up, which should make sense because once you move away from God and God's truth, you're going to embrace Satan and Satan's lies. And so we go back. So this is what this guy is saying that Jesus is. Jesus is non-binary, meaning he's not male or female. He's kind of in the middle of some miasmic gender spectrum that he's going to explain for us here. So here's the first clip of what I want you to see of him explaining this.
If you espouse to the idea that Jesus was born of a virgin birth, then Jesus could not have had male chromosomes. Therefore, Jesus had only female chromosomes and presented as masculine, so Jesus was non-binary.
So clearly he's referencing the virgin birth, which of course is true, and he only had a biological mother as far as humanly speaking, and the Holy Spirit came upon Mary to impregnate her supernaturally with Jesus. But the Bible makes it plain that he was a male, that he was a man. And so the Bible doesn't tell us whether or not he had just male or female chromosomes or he had male chromosomes. It doesn't really tell us that, but it does tell us that he was a man. He didn't present as a man. He actually was a man. And we see this in Luke 1:26-27. And there's several verses that you can go to, but just to pull out one of the earlier ones that talk about his birth. In Luke chapter 1, verses 26, it says, "Now in the 6th month, the angel Gabriel was sent from God to a city in Galilee called Nazareth, to a virgin betrothed to a man whose name was Joseph, of the house of David, and the virgin's name was Mary. And in coming, he said to her, 'Greetings, favored one, the Lord is with you.' But she was very perplexed at this statement and was pondering what kind of greeting this was. And the angel said to her, 'Do not be afraid, Mary, for you have found favor with God. And behold, you will conceive in your womb and bear a son, and you shall call him Jesus. He will be great and will be called the Son of the Most High, and the Lord God will give him the throne of his father David. And he will reign over the house of Jacob forever, and there will be no end of his kingdom.'" So clearly, Jesus was a male. He didn't just present as a male. God himself sent his angel and told Mary that she would give birth to a male child. So this was a fully male, truly male person. But let this guy continue to explain his reasoning here.
And in terms of male and female, and the Hebrew, the word that was used for "and" describes a spectrum. Male and female and everything in between.
So, again, there's really nothing to really back up what he's saying as far as that in the Hebrew "and" covers a spectrum of gender. So it's not just male and female, but it's everything in between. But the Bible gives no revelation to anything other than male or female in Genesis 1. And we see that constant throughout the whole scriptures. There's men and women, women and men, male clothing, female clothing, husbands, wives. It's always talking about the dichotomous male or female. So there is no relation to anything of a spectrum of gender, at least in the Bible. So this guy really just making something up out of whole cloth. Again, going back to the whole narcissistic behavior that we all are tempted to exhibit at one point or another. But at this point, this guy's completely gone off the rails and trying to fit God into his own self-expression of gender identity while rejecting the very God who established gender identity to begin with. So let's continue to hear his explanation of Jesus being non-binary.
Man and woman is a biological concept. Science currently identifies 13 combinations and permutations of XY chromosomes. Masculine and feminine is a sociological construct that is dependent upon the society with which you are talking about.
And you can see if you're watching online, if you're just listening, this guy at the end kind of gives it a face of, this is obvious, this is easy, this is not something that should be complicated. What I just explained, this is common sense. But when in fact it's just nonsense. He says men and women are qualities that are just on the spectrum, and that there's no really set scientific gender binary, because he says there's 13 different XY combinations that have shown themselves to be true, which I think is true last I checked. But again, we live in a fallen world. We live in a world that has been cursed because of sin, which is why Jesus came into the world. So to pervert the identity of who Jesus was, to fit your own temporal gender identity, one day this guy will die. You and I will die and will have to give an account. And he's completely rejecting the only man who can save him from his sin. But he says that there's 13 permutations of XY combinations within science, so to speak. And if there are, again, we live in a fallen world, and we're going to see all kinds of perversions of the standard. But 99% of the time, you have male or female babies that are being born. And he also goes on to say that masculine and feminine are just societal concepts. It's like, well, no, society, at least this society, got its principles from the Bible, and societies before that always had male and female relationships, male and female roles. If you go anywhere else in the world, there are male and female roles within every society, no matter how quote unquote uncivilized the area may be. because again, this is what God has inherently put into the DNA of all of us, knowing that the only way to propagate the species, the only way to propagate humanity is through male and female relationships, through sexual relationships. So to pretend as if these spectrums don't exist, again goes back to the fact that we love to exposit our own ideas, our own opinions, and reject God's standard of truth that he has given us, God's revelation of truth that he's given us. And this is exactly what is on display in this man's thinking. And he's not alone. There's many people that think like him. And there's also many Christians who are also buying into this kind of thinking, something called queer theology. And it's really making its way through seminaries and quote unquote seminaries. Again, I don't know why you're a seminary if you don't even affirm the qualities, the sexual identities that God lays down in Genesis 1, the first chapter of the first book of God's revelations lays down this standard of biology between men and women. But again, this thinking is not limited to just the world. It's making its way into the church, and we have to stand guard against it. And we are going to remain faithful to what God has called us to do in his word. So thank you for listening to this episode, and we will see you on the next one.